we can record. Okay. Okay. There we go. All right. Yeah, so we're just watching the participant count climbing so we can see everybody's coming in, Alastair.
Excellent. Both people on?
Yeah. There's quite a few more than both. Oh, it's going up rather fast. There you go. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Well, welcome, everybody. To our first of this ACS Queensland webinar series. It's been a while since we've had a webinar, and I'm just going to introduce this one. Then I'm going to introduce our very distinguished speaker, who's starting off this series of webinars for us. He will chat to us today, and then he will also answer questions. But you'll find that there's a question or Q&A button on the bottom of the webinar, which you can put on the questions, and I'll ask them on your behalf to Alastair. So just as a background, cybersecurity is one of Australia's national security priorities. It's Australia's national security, economic prosperity and social well-being rely on the availability, integrity and confidentiality of a range of information and communications technology. The risk to the Australian economy from computer intrusion and the spread of malicious code by organised crime has been assessed as high. An increase in the scale, sophistication and penetration of cybercrime has made it increasingly difficult to identify and defeat. In May 2016, Australia appointed the first special advisor to the Prime Minister on cybersecurity, Alastair MacGibbon. This role provides national leadership and advocacy on cybersecurity policy and the implementation of the government's cybersecurity strategy. Alastair also sets clear objectives and priorities to government's operational cybersecurity agencies and oversees their implementation. The special advisor also ensures effective partnerships with Australian governments, the private sector, non-governmental organisations, the research community and international partners, and no doubt many other things in his copious spare time after doing all of this. In this webinar, Alastair is going to give us an understanding of the cybersecurity strategy, look at recent events from a personal perspective, and as I've indicated, he's very kindly agreed to answer some questions. Just a very brief background on Alastair before we switch over to him. Alastair was Australia's first Children's E-Safety Commissioner before taking on this current role. He led online safety education and protection for Australian children and young people and managed complaints about offensive or illegal online content. Prior to that, he's worked for 15 years as an agent with the Australian Federal Police, including as the founding director of the Australian High-Tech Crime Centre, which many will remember, I think, over the years has been being a fantastic part of our overall infrastructure in the cybersecurity space. Along with other private sector roles, such as Senior Director of Trust, Safety and Customer Support at eBay, he's been a Director of the Centre for Internet Safety at the University of Canberra. There can be no better person to talk to us about this topic today than Alastair, and I'm just going to bring up a brief slide for everybody about the Australia cybersecurity strategy at a glance. And when you've had a moment to have a look at that, Alastair will then start to present to us. Okay.
Right, Nick, are you happy for me to start?
Over to you, Alastair.
Thanks very much.
We'll stop the sharing.
Okay, brilliant. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Nick, thank you. We're lovely to be doing business with you again. I first, of course, started dealing with you back in the Australian High-Tech Crime Centre days that you mentioned during your introduction. So we've had a long and warm relationship over that time, and I've also had a long and warm relationship with the Australian Computer Society that forms a really critical part in what I think are the solutions we need for this increasingly wicked problem. So Nick had already said that the cybersecurity strategy was launched in April this year. It was launched by the Prime Minister. It's a funded strategy. There are $230 million in that strategy. We just saw the strategy on a page and I'm going to talk through it. When you do that, when I do that, keep in mind that while the strategy itself has $230 million in it, there's an additional $400 million in the Defence White Paper for the Defence Department to increase its cyber capabilities. And those two documents really need to be read in conjunction. I'll also make this observation at the start. I've been in this space for quite some time, as have, I'm sure, many of you online. and I'd be really keen on the feedback from the group. I'm an interactive type of guy, so I'd love to hear whether you think the same. In 2016, I have never seen the stars align as well for us to actually start achieving groundbreaking, in paradigm-breaking advances in cybersecurity. We did great things in the really early 2000s, but sometimes we were before our time, sometimes we didn't get political traction, sometimes we didn't get traction in corporates. No matter which government I deal with, whether it's in Canberra or in the states and territories, no matter which bureaucracies I deal with, and organisations, some of which have traditionally been a little bit more inward-looking, and no matter which companies I deal with or associations, industry associations, I've never seen the level of interest in doing something and catching up to the curve and getting ahead of it if we can. I'd love to at least catch up. So 2016 is the start of something great. For those of us in this business, shame on us if we don't actually take advantage of that and drive change. Because the observation I would make is that if we continue on our very linear path that we've been on for quite some time, then we will actually fail in our business. Dan Tehan, the Minister assisting the Prime Minister on cybersecurity, another part of the construct that came about as a result of the Prime Minister launching that strategy in April, said as much at the National Press Club yesterday, that we need to be doing more, that business as usual is not good enough. I can tell you unofficially that I'm under increasing pressure to accelerate the strategy, to make sure that we move forward faster than was conceivable before. And then once I get to that speed, to break it again and move faster still. There are reasons for that I'll get into, one of which, for example, is the census, and a range of other issues that have occurred in the short time I've been in this role that have really lifted the amount of political pressure, the cadence of what we're doing in our office, and very importantly, the need for us to cooperate. So stars are aligned, we're funded, we're ambitious, and we've got to go faster. But let me say this too. The Prime Minister gave a speech in Washington recently, and he said something that I think you would agree with. And again, if you don't, please come out. Please also start typing questions, because I could just stop abruptly and then we'll all be embarrassed and Nick will have to sing for us. And we don't want that, having heard him sing before. It's this. He said in this speech that with matters of counter-terrorism, people expect the government to lead. It's right and proper that they do so. That's where the arms of government really come to the fore. On matters of cybersecurity, governments partner, and that's important. The Commonwealth has to partner with states and territories. The Commonwealth needs to partner with states and territories and with industry. The Commonwealth needs to partner with states and territories, industry, academia, and end users. If we don't all act collectively, we will fail. No matter how well funded our strategy is, no matter how ambitious we are, no matter how hard we drive, we cannot win unless we do this together. So I think that's a good background. The strategy is written with the knowledge that we have the Australian Cybersecurity Centre version 1.0 in place. The Cybersecurity Centre forms a critical part of the strategy, and its existence should make Australians proud and give them some sense of the fact that the government has been working on this and will continue to work on it. So the agencies that are inside the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, that is located currently in the ASIO building in Canberra, but we're moving it to a more accessible place, is obviously ASIO, the Australian Signals Directorate that forms the backbone of that centre, the Defence Intelligence Organisation, the Australian Federal Police, the Computer Emergency Response Team Australia, and the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission. It is a true fusion centre. Intelligence coming in from those various agencies fused together to look at what the most appropriate matters to deal with are. When complaints or notifications come into the centre to any one of those agencies, you're notifying all of them. And the appropriate agency is brought to bear, the appropriate relationships are used, and we better serve the Australian public. Another core part of the strategy, of the 5 key parts of the strategy that you saw in that screen, and if you wanted to flick back to this at all, Nick, feel free, but let me briefly talk about it. I'm going to start with what was the middle point, which is the global responsibility and influence. A couple of weeks ago, Toby Feakin, who might be well known to many of you, was appointed as Australia's first cybersecurity ambassador, and he'll pick up that baton sometime after Christmas, and I'm really excited about Toby being there. I've started with the global bit because the internet's a global thing, as you all know. The Australian government has a philosophy, has a belief that it is pushing out into the international community that governance of the internet should not rest with any government alone. In fact, in many respects, as you know, should not rest with government at all. We believe in a free and open internet, and we will pursue that as a government in international fora so that we don't balkanise the web and we allow it to be that great democratising tool that it is. And while we say it should be a free and open internet, there's a comma after that, and that comma then says, but there should be no safe havens for criminals. There should be no place in this world where a criminal thinks they can act with impunity, where they can commit crimes against us, where the norms of society are not reflected in that internet. Back to my policing days, I always saw the internet as being a public place. I saw it as being a place where normal activity, normal civilization takes place. Now, if I was to think of the internet as a city, there are some well-lit bits. There's a red light district. There's an industrial factory area, which you don't necessarily walk around at night in, but you certainly don't expect total lawlessness. You certainly don't expect or accept, dare I say, that those activities can occur without the concept of law enforcement, without the concept of the rule of civil law, without the concept of neighbours looking after neighbours. And yet on the internet, somehow we've convinced ourselves that we cannot influence the internet, and that is patently wrong. The last thing in that global responsibility and influence section relates to capacity building in the region, which we'll do. The Cyber Ambassador will take out into the region in conjunction with the computer emergency response team, in conjunction with the Australian Federal Police and others, and help our regional neighbours to lift their game and their capacity, helping make the internet a safer, more productive place. Now, Nick mentioned in his introduction something that I thought was very interesting, that this cyber strategy is a national security strategy. And what I'd say to you is it's a national security strategy in two ways. In the traditional sense, you've heard the agencies I've already mentioned inside the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. When you start mentioning agencies like ASIO and the Signals Directorate and the Defence Intelligence Organisation, it makes sense. These are national security agencies, and therefore, in a traditional sense, it is a national security strategy. But I think we're selling ourselves short if that's the only way we measure this. The better way to measure it is what's the broader impact on our economy, whether the citizens are safe, whether they trust this infrastructure to build their businesses, to run their lives, to run our critical infrastructure. And that's really where this is truly a national security issue. And I'm really excited by the fact that we really sit into both camps, the more traditional definition and a more modern definition. At the top of that page that you saw is this concept of a national cyber partnership, and there are a few key components in that. Firstly, the Prime Minister is directly involved. Not only did he launch the strategy, but my position that sits inside the public service, just in case the title of Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on Cybersecurity sounds like I sit in his office, I don't. I sit inside Prime Minister and Cabinet. I answer to Martin Parkinson, the Secretary of Prime Minister and Cabinet. But I also answer directly to the Prime Minister in terms of the execution of the strategy and in terms of any issues or questions he has. So this has prime ministerial involvement, has an extreme level, as you can imagine, of prime ministerial interest, and that goes partly towards how those stars have begun to align. I've already mentioned that Dan Tehan, the Minister assisting the Prime Minister on cybersecurity, was also appointed in that role. He wears two other hats, the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel. That's important, of course, because ASD and DIO are major contributors to the capacity. So that's fantastic to have a minister that can straddle into that defence space as well. Now, the Prime Minister, the last two Prime Ministers, have chaired meetings with high-level business executives to talk about these matters. Getting any time with the Prime Minister to talk about these things is great. Dan Tehan is taking that further and will have a much greater cadence in engaging industry. And that's a good thing too. I've already mentioned that we're moving the Australian Cybersecurity Centre out of the ASIO building. And that's important because you would expect the ASIO building not to be overly welcoming to foot traffic and people that just want to drop in and say hi. What we really need to be doing is have the Cybersecurity Centre in a building that has both the most highly classified places that you can operate in, down to the lowest classification, open floor plans where anyone can visit and drop by for a chat. because it's only by doing that we can really drive this further. And those are important things. The last part of the National Cyber Partnership is how do we most effectively measure the impact of these incidents on Australia? What impact does it have on our economy? What impact does it have on our citizens? And when I was in business, there was the phrase that you'd all be aware of: if it can't be measured, it can't be impacted. If it can't be measured, people won't act. So we need to get a better handle on what impact this is having, builds better cases for ROI and other such things. On that one pager, that's 2 of the 5 parts of the strategy. The third is the concept of strong cyber defences. You would expect in any cybersecurity strategy that it involves, of course, bolstering our capabilities in cybersecurity. And this strategy does that to a significant level. There'll be more staff for the Computer Emergency Response Team, more staff for the Australian Signals Directorate, more staff for the Australian Federal Police, and more staff for the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission. I would encourage any person online today, of course, to apply for those jobs. They are being advertised. They are trying to fill those vacancies. There can be nothing more exciting and interesting than working in government. It is a fascinating space. Even if it's just part of your career journey, I would urge you to consider working in government. Don't think that it is stodgy and slow. Some of the most fascinating work you can do is in that space. So just a quick plug there for government. Nick can take a commission on any person that we employ. That'd be fantastic. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, we've already rolled out these health checks with the ASX 100. Co-designed between the ASX 100 companies, ASIC, and the top 4 audit firms, this concept of a maturity associated with a maturity index for the top 100 companies in Australia. That is being designed, it's been rolled out, and we'll be expecting the results pretty soon. It will allow for the first time companies to benchmark themselves against their peers, for us to benchmark by sector, and for us to better understand the maturity of Australian businesses. Once we've done that, we'll look to roll that out much further, possibly trim down because it's a bit top heavy, obviously, with audit partners and others involved. But the aim there is not to be getting the CIO or an IT security person to be filling out that questionnaire, but for the CEO or the chair of the organisation themselves to be doing it. Because that's the only way, as you know, to really understand the maturity of these things inside an organisation. And I guess the last and perhaps the most important aspect in, last 2 most important aspects in those strong defences are, 1, exercising. The Commonwealth will be doing more exercising. It'll be doing more exercising with our state and territory partners, and we'll reach out to industry to work out how we can exercise there as well. Now, I've been in this space for quite some time, and I'm not convinced that we do enough exercising, and certainly that's part of the strategy. And the last key component to talk about in the strong cyber defences capability of these concept of joint cyber threat centres. They are essentially a hub that will be built in various capital cities to allow industry and broader private sector to be co-located with police and the Computer Emergency Response Team, with state and territory services as well, so that we can better, in a real-time sense, grow the information sharing, and I think perhaps more importantly than all, break cultural barriers so that we learn to work together more effectively. Now, the first centres rolling out in Brisbane will be open up in the new year, and then we'll be rolling it out in Sydney and Melbourne, followed by Adelaide and Perth. I'm looking to do that as quickly as we can while learning as we go. We don't do enough information sharing at a holistic level. The fourth, so the second last of the components to talk to you about the strategy, is the concept of growth and innovation. Growth and innovation is, I'll start with Data 61, who many of you hopefully have dealt with over time, led by Adrian Turner, a great national asset for us. Data 61 sits within the CSIRO and was part of NICTA, if you recall. Rolled back into CSIRO, has a capacity there to be developing cybersecurity technologies and tools, and looking at how to commercialise and spin off those capabilities. There's also cybersecurity growth centres where there will be nodes out in, so it's a very virtual thing. Money there to help take from proof of concept or small businesses up to larger businesses, and working with Austrade to take that out offshore. So we don't own enough of what is a growing cybersecurity market. And we've all seen the story of where a talented person has come up with a really good idea and has tried selling it to an Australian government first, to only find that the Australian government wasn't interested. So they go over to the United States, sell it to a 3-letter agency, come back to Australia to try to sell again, only to find we're still not interested until it gets acquired by a US multinational, and then we'll buy the product. We need to break that cycle. We need to make sure our procurement doesn't favour Australians, but certainly doesn't hinder them as well. And we need to grow a strong Australian cybersecurity industry. That's a good thing for us, and that's a good thing for industry. And the last, and I suspect possibly most important component in the strategy, is this concept of a Cybersmart Nation. As you all know, this is a social problem as much or more than it is a technical problem. You know that the attacker will go for the end user. You know that the end user is often the weakest link in any type of network and on any device. And frankly, we need to improve the way we educate those end users. If I was being open, I've been in the space for 15 or so years trying to educate people. If this was an Alcoholics Anonymous conference where I'm trying to seek help and forgiveness, I'd put up my hand and I'd say, my name's Alastair MacGibbon and I'm a failed cybersecurity educator. And you could probably all put up your hands and say the same thing as well. Why do I say it? Because there's a feel-good factor in doing this, but have we actually demonstrably changed end-user behaviour? Is it too hard for us to do, or have we not focused our efforts enough? How can it be that a nation that once had the highest levels of skin cancer and melanoma as a result of sun exposure, that we've now got kids with vitamin D deficiencies because we've been so successful in driving hats and sunglasses and sunscreen and shirts? When I grew up, you'd see how much skin you could peel off in one go and how big the blisters were on your back. That's no longer a badge of honour. And frankly, I believe we can change the way people behave online as well. And we just need unity of effort. We need to bury our own brands. We need to bury our own egos, and we need to really work out what are those key few messages. And I don't care if we don't agree on whether issue number 3 or 4 should be swapped out, or whether I had a 5th one I would have liked to have snuck in. The simple reality is, by being diverse and by being ununified, we are failing the very people that we serve. So I have a really strong interest in this, as you might be able to tell. Another part of a Cybersmart Nation is ensuring that we close the skills gap. You all know that there aren't enough people in this space, and we're not growing enough people in this space. That's why I love talking to an organisation like an ACS or any of your cohort industry associations, even those specially involved in cybersecurity, because we need to grow that pool of talent. Frankly, we need to grow that pool of talent so they can work for the Australian government. As I've already given the free advertising, we actually need more people. Industry needs more people. And we can't continue to think that we can just import that skill set. We actually do need to grow our own. And that has to start in schools. You will have all seen that STEM in schools is a hot topic, and we'll leverage the back of that. That has to start in primary school. Young women are making decisions about their choices to do with technology in primary school. That means we need to be in there telling them why they need to be taking those choices and making a career in cyber. By high school, we've lost them. So I see this as a space program. I see this as us investing, and we won't be seeing the results for over a decade. If we don't do it, we're actually letting ourselves down, and we're letting our kids down, we're letting the generation after them down. We must break the cycle, we must invest, we must do it well. The last part of it is to do with the concept of academic centres of excellence. So that the Commonwealth, through the Department of Education, anoints those tertiary institutions that we believe are producing the best job-ready cybersecurity graduates. But I'd say to you that if we had a fixation only on tertiary education, then we'll be failing again. We also need to look at vocational education and other ways of recognising skills, because you don't need a PhD for all of this. So that's the cybersecurity strategy. I can tell you that we're actively involving the states and territories via COAG. I had a meeting literally a couple of days ago with my state and territory counterparts. I'm visiting the various states and territories. I have nothing but open doors, nothing but cooperation, nothing but a desire to move forward. Look, the time has changed for us. This is a business, not an IT issue. This is a social, not an IT issue. This is an Australia-wide issue, not a government-only issue. It's certainly not a Commonwealth-only issue. I'm committed to working aggressively, cooperatively, supportingly with anyone that wants to move the dial in this space, because until we do that, I think we'll be failing not just ourselves, but those that come after us. And shame on us if we don't take full advantage of the situation we're in as those stars align. I saw a question pop up on the screen, Nick, and if I could, and it was about the concept of Internet of Things. You would have all seen recently the extraordinarily large denial of service attack that was carried out on the East Coast of the United States. I'm getting some weird feedback. Are you, Nick?
No, not at the moment.
Oh, there you go. It's just me then. That's just the government system. That's fine.
Okay.
They're well run.
I heard that.
That's right. You have no doubt. So where was I? Internet of Things. Yeah. So one of the observations I'd make to you, and I'd love to be challenged on whether you think I'm wrong on this, is I think in many respects we're looking backwards, trying to solve yesterday's problem tomorrow, and we're not looking ahead of us and looking at the fact that our 5 billion connected devices today are going to become 55 billion connected devices within 4 or 5 years. So if we think we have problems now, if we think we're not necessarily coping with where we are now with 5 billion connected devices, where we're going to be when there are 55 billion of them without security built in with their actual architecture, and where those things will be often acting autonomously. I think that if we don't solve yesterday's problem now, then we're certainly not going to be prepared for tomorrow's problem today. So, Nick, I'm not sure how long I've spoken for. I'm happy to keep going, but I'd also be most pleased to throw it open to the community there and see what questions I can answer. Yeah.
We're about halfway through. You've spoken for about half an hour. Alastair, thank you.
That's not bad.
A couple of questions.
I'll draw a breath now.
Okay, there's a couple of questions coming up on the chat function. So if people like to come through and use the chat function, I can pick up those questions and make sure Alastair can get them. But the first one, Alastair, for you is a question saying, will there be a job program for new individuals entering the cybersecurity and established professionals? So I guess you've sort of indicated what government's doing. I wonder if picking up that question, one of the problems we seem to have is quite a shortage, don't we, of cybersecurity professionals. Is there, do you want to spend a bit of time just picking up or going over a bit more details of some of those programs that you were mentioning?
Yes. So look, you're right, Nick. Look, the Commonwealth itself, anyone that's applied for Commonwealth's position will know that one of the problems you face is the concept of obtaining a security clearance. And security clearances require a sponsor, and they also need to, they also take time. And so there can be quite a lag in the recruitment process to the Commonwealth. That's been problematic for people because government can work at a pace that government works at. So increasingly we're going to try to be smart in taking a person who's applied for a position that might require a top secret positive vet, but put them into an organisation where a quick low-level negative vet will get them in the door, working for an organisation, getting exposed, getting skill sets, breaking down cultural barriers before they move into the position they'd actually applied for once the security clearance comes through. So that's what we'll be doing at a Commonwealth level, and we'll be doing that smarter. I think we need to look at vocational training. I think we need to look at recognising skill sets. I see a huge role for the ACS in this, in how to work with industry so that they develop internships, so that we develop programs to see people start in a SOC, working the night shift, through to becoming a proper full-fledged incident responder, doing network analysis, malware reverse engineering, for example, or sophisticated systems architecture. All of those things can come, but you don't need those skills at the very start of your career. And we should stop thinking that a person has to have a PhD in order to work in this space. And we're going to start in the schools. We're going to start in the schools. I don't believe in reinventing wheels. That's too easy for us to do, tie us up in some committees for a bit longer and not do something. I'm an 80-20 type of guy. I think what we need to do is identify what's fit for purpose and roll that out fast. That does mean, of course, that there are going to be failures from time to time, and I have no problems at all going back up to government and saying we've learned from what we did here, and we're going to change the way we do our business. I will not be the person who slavishly executes upon a plan just because it's our plan. Those of you in the private sector will get what I'm saying. Those of you in government, if there are any we'll sit there possibly breaking into a cold sweat. But the reality is, unless we change the way we do our business, we're not going to win. And I came back to government to win.
Thanks. So just one comment, and just get you to your thoughts on it. I was talking to a senior academic from the university, as in a deputy vice chancellor level at the university yesterday. He said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. We've just introduced a master's degree in cybersecurity. But the trouble is, hardly anybody got to finish it because people kept recruiting these students after they'd done only a few modules of it. So there does seem to be some demand out there."
Yes, there is a huge demand. I tell my kids that they won't be the Boilermakers of the next generation if they do cybersecurity. I mean, it's a job for life. Not that we want jobs for life in things we're trying to eradicate, but I suspect this is going to be a generation or two of good hard work. Nick, it'll see me out, I'm sure. And my kids could choose worse careers than getting some good cyber skills.
Thank you. And there's a question here, another question, if I could ask you, Alastair, that someone's mentioned. You mentioned the establishment of a number of key measures to monitor the maturity of basically cyber maturity. What measures are currently in place, and what are they?
So the one I'd urge people to look up would be the ASX 100 health check. That's the start of the maturity benchmarking process. That's in flight as we speak. What we need to do is then scale that beyond the ASX 100. I was talking to a state government the other day who wants to run across all of their departments. Brilliant, I said. Why wouldn't we? Why can't we use the same set of questions for any large organisation, which state governments are, as is the Commonwealth? So that's what we can do there. The bigger question is how we scale down to the smaller businesses. And we're working on that as well. And that will come out, in the near term, co-designed, and, we're going to iterate these things. But the concept of the broader, quite sophisticated cyber maturity, I'm really pleased to say how quickly that has developed with the ASX and with ASIC, to their credit, and with the big four audit firms. And I must say, one of the most pleasing aspects of that ASX 100 maturity model is that the big four audit firms are cooperating on it. Each one takes a lead on one of their own customers because the ASX 100 clearly uses them for their audit functions. But they're being very cooperative, including with the information, so that we can get a true view for the first time ever across that type of cohort. And then we're going to look at how we can scale and roll it out. And I just saw a question pop up, just showing you how real time I am. Yeah. Who are the big four? Well, that's obviously Deloitte, PwC, EY, and KPMG, the big four audit firms.
Yeah. Thank you. Just expanding on that slightly, you'd be familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework that a lot of the American Institute of Directors, I can't remember the exact name, National, I think, Association of Company Directors in the US, has been pushing very strongly. Is that something you've had much involvement with?
Yes, there's no doubt. I mean, it's a good framework. I see a lot of people moving towards it. From the Commonwealth point of view, clearly we stick with the Information Security Manual, which is iterating, written by the Australian Signals Directorate. Yes, absolutely. I look at things like there are some good initiatives in the UK and there's some great initiatives in the US. We're constantly looking outside. My view is I don't want to reinvent wheels. The last thing we need is to tailor something that's fit for purpose in another jurisdiction, somehow decide that we need to make a uniquely Australian thing. I think we need to actually bend ourselves to the broader marketplaces. If we're competing globally and we want to be able to do business globally, then we should be taking a global view of these things. So the Cyber Essentials in the UK, classic example of a really good program. The NIST stuff in the US, example of really good stuff. We've just got to make mature decisions. We've got to bury our own brands. We've got to stop doing the way we've done business in the past, which is put it to a committee and 18 months later, creating an unscalable Australian version of something that is creating a branch line on the rail, which never gets updated and isn't sustainable. We need to put ourselves into the global space. We need to make sure these things are sustainable and scalable, and we can benchmark not just against ourselves, but our peers offshore.
Thanks. There's a question here I've just got, which is a slightly longer one, so bear with me as I put it to you. It's over the last 5 to 10 years working with industry, often in critical infrastructure, I've seen increased focus on cybersecurity. This is generally good. The implementation of VPNs, WANs, token-based security, etc. So there appears to be reasonable penetration of learnings into the need of network and application level security. However, I personally witnessed a number of sites be brought down because of the availability of USB ports and poorly chosen Wi-Fi security. What initiatives are in place to tackle the physical side of cybersecurity?
Yes, well, you can't de-link the two, can you? Crazy for us to look only at software and not look at the fact that our USB port's open, right? There's no point locking the front door if you leave a window undone at the back. And I just earlier today was dealing with a bunch of government folk who are on the protective security side, talking to them about why cyber is important. So now I'm talking to a bunch of cyber people about why the physical security, because we shouldn't be distinct. There should be no distinction between the two. As you know, Nick, you could create a really crunchy, hard exterior to a network if you allow a person that's inside the building to plug straight into an open port and do certain activities, then you may as well not have had that security on the outside. So yeah, we need to get smarter on things like USBs. But we need to get smarter with passwords. You know, it's funny, I talk to various agencies about sophisticated exploits and malware and zero-day and all those other things. And sometimes people will say to me, they're all good, but if people haven't got strong passwords, I'll just guess their password. And it's an important lesson for us all. We know that crooks will do that. We know nation states will do it. But frankly, a lot of this still comes down to good hygiene and good practice. So it's not just a technology problem, it's a behavioural problem. It's not just a behavioural problem and a technology problem, but also a physical security problem, as your questioner asked. And we need to look at those things holistically. Ultimately, Nick, I have a view that we need to look at, and this is not new, of course, what's the value of the data and the operations you're trying to protect. That's not new, right? But it's interesting, I've been thinking about this a lot more lately. We'll often say to businesses and governments, look at what the value is of this data or service that it provides to you, then you're going to know what to protect. I want to change that slightly, and I want to say, definitely you need to look at what information is important to you and what network and services and other things are important to you and operations. But I want to also say what's important to your adversary as well. What would a nation state want from you? Put yourself in the shoes of a nation state. They might want to use your infrastructure. They may want to steal your secrets, particularly for commercial purposes, so they industrialise those in their own countries. What about criminals? Well, online criminals, if you take the sex offenders out of the picture, of which there are far too many online, we're dealing with coin-operated criminals in the type of sphere we're talking about. They want cash. If they can get access to my bank account or to the treasury system of an organisation, they're happy. If they can get credit card details, they're happy. If they can't get those things, they're going to go for personal information that they can parlay into cash. If they can't get those things, they're going to lock our computers down and they're going to ransom. They're essentially going to extort us to unlock those computer systems. So if you understand what crooks do, crooks basically want cash. They're either going to want cash by taking information or services or things, or they're going to shut down something that's vital to us and get us to pay for it to open. I've dealt with standover merchants in the offline world for years when I worked in organised crime. Same type of people online, quite a successful business model with ransomware. Now, they're the crooks, they're the nation states. What else is there? There's the issue-motivated groups. Frankly, in my view, issue-motivated groups are just crooks with a more sophisticated name. There's certainly no white knights. There's certainly not Robin Hood out to helping the poor from the rich. These are anarchic groups that coalesce around issues and frankly harm end users. Anyone who thinks that they are not just criminals, I'm happy to have that debate with them. What are they going to be after? They might be after embarrassing you. They might be after stealing information. I mean, hell, tell me they're white knights when they steal my end users' information and publish that online. That's not necessarily harming me. That's harming my 50,000 or 100,000 end users. What, just showing I'm stupid by getting their stuff out? You're harming a lot of other people. You're not a hero. And then lastly, possibly the biggest predator of all is insiders. I'm not telling any of your members anything. But really, there are multiple types of insiders. There's a malicious insiders that could be working for any one of those three previous ones, nation states, criminals, issue-motivated groups, they just might be angry at us and hate us to cause us harm. And then we need to look at things like user access and control and who has access to things. And what about if I offboard a former employee? Am I shutting down their access straight away, or preferably before I get rid of them? And then lastly, in terms of insiders, what about the accidental one? What about the unwitting insider? I give a long speech about the concept of insiders outside and outsiders inside. The concept of perimeter in insiders and outsiders has gone, in my view. My perimeter of the organisation I work in is wherever I take the device that I've got. That includes to home. That includes offshore. So the concept of this crunchy exterior is gone. So the insider is outside, and the insiders are used by outsiders, right? We know that social engineering and targeting done. So that's a very long answer to what I thought was a really good question, and I've probably taken up too much of your time. So next question, please, Nick.
No, definitely not taking up too much of the time, Alastair. There's a couple of more questions coming in, and I'll
answer them faster for you.
No, that's fine. You're answering it very well. Thank you for that. So, one question is, how does the Commonwealth provide a common solution or platform across the states, as each state has unique solutions and policies, and in brackets interpretation of the Commonwealth strategy? Whoops, I've just lost the thing. Yeah, there we are. I've got it now, and the strength of the Commonwealth will only be as good as the weakest link or state. So I guess it's a question.
Firstly, welcome to Federation. It's a beautiful thing. The Commonwealth does not run most of the infrastructure we're talking about. The states and territories are clearly highly independent. The Australian Signals Directorate has a responsibility for assisting state and territory governments with their security. And of course, they produce the Information Security Manual along with other Commonwealth protective security documentation, whether it's from ASD or the Attorney General's Department or others. Now, it is up to the states to interpret that, just like it is for an agency head within the Commonwealth to interpret that. And that's that's a consequence of federation. What I would say is my level of engagement with states and territories is more than I've ever seen before. We are engaging at a COAG level, the Council of Australian Governments, and my counterparts in the states and territories are very, very keen for action. In terms of common platforms, it may well be at some time that there are common platforms that the Commonwealth and the states have, but we need to accept the fact that at the moment the IT shops are run very differently. There's some great work being done in some states and territories, and there's some great work being done in Commonwealth agencies, but it's not universal. We need to learn from each other. If anything like the census and what happened on August the 9th told me, it's digital service delivery of government is a sophisticated level of digital service delivery of government is expected by the Australian population. On that night, we're expecting about 10 million households or so possibly to log in and complete their census. And we were disrupted by what were relatively minor events, followed by some minor other incidents that led to the ABS turning the website off. What it drove home to me, though, is what about our other critical government services that are conducted online? The number one way in which Australian governments engage Australians is online. I get my passport online, I do my tax online, I can get welfare online. For state and territory, I do a whole range of other things, licensing, registration renewals, all those other things online. So digital service delivery to the public is essential. Now, the trouble is, government still architects often for yesterday's problem and using yesterday's architectural schemas. And that's not good for us. It's not good for us because they're slow, they're expensive to scale, they become legacy systems reasonably quickly, and perhaps more importantly of all, it's not necessarily a great user experience, and we can't iterate and move fast on what the public now expects. The public has a very high expectation on the usability and user experience of engaging with government, and you know, we need to ask ourselves the question whether we're meeting those expectations. Coupled with, by the way, being held to a very, very high bar in terms of privacy and security, higher than some of our free commercial services that we use. But hey, the public has a right to expect that when government collects information, it does it well, that it secures it, and provides a good service back. So, you know, I can't promise you anything grand when it comes to states and territories. What I will tell you is the level of dialogue I have with them, the level of commitment we have to them, and the level of engagement we have is I've just never seen before. The if I don't take advantage of that and help them drive forward, again, shame on me.
Thank you. Another question. I think you're going to like this one. Alastair, are there any measures to tackle nation-state espionage? Are we going to have a Cybersecurity Act on its own?
Well, the Australian Signals Directorate and the ACSC more holistically, of course, deals with nation-state activities. I would urge people online here to look at the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's 2016 threat report. Just Google that, pull that up. That is us attempting to be increasingly transparent, and that's something I hope people have noticed in the last 6 months, that we are increasingly trying to go out to the public and saying where we've failed, saying where we've seen things that are of interest. We're not going to reveal all things, that would be kind of crazy, but we're trying to reveal more, and we're trying to talk more about what we're seeing. Just yesterday, and the fact that this is a recorded, I'm presuming you're recording, Nick, on the 23rd of November, the Prime Minister made a statement to the Parliament about counter-terrorism, and inside that statement he talked about offensive cyber operations being carried out by the Australian government. Now, in April was the first time the Commonwealth government said it had offensive cyber capabilities, and what we said then was that these cyber capabilities are there to respond to the defence of Australia in times of a cyber attack, and that it was an extra tool set that the Australian government had to consider when responding to such things. Well, yesterday the Prime Minister went further and said that there is a capacity for Australia to carry out offensive cyber activities against targets offshore to disrupt, degrade or deny computers or computer networks. In this case of Daesh in Iraq and Syria, where our forces are actively fighting. So in support of military operations, in conjunction with the Joint Operations Command, under the usual military authorities and with all the oversight that comes with that, with the additional oversight that the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security has over the Australian Signals Directorate, in addition to the Parliamentary Joint Committee, in addition to the normal domestic laws and the international laws that come to the fore here of armed conflict and other such things, and the rules of engagement of the Australian military, the Australian government is actively pursuing offensive cyber capabilities. Now, that's against a threat that I would suspect everyone would agree needs to be dealt with, and Australians should be pleased that there is that additional capability to be put aside or next to law enforcement sanctions, military action, diplomatic or other such ways of the government traditionally carrying out its business. But look, espionage itself, it goes without saying, nation states will always be interested in other nation states, and you have to accept that occurs. Most nation states are after national secrets. Well, that's their job. ASD's job is to protect those national secrets as a part of its remit to help protect those systems. Where we do draw the line is when governments get involved in stealing IP for the purposes of commercialisation, and we do see that does occur from time to time, and we would strenuously argue that that's not cricket. That's certainly not what espionage is meant to be about. And to steal your IP or the IP from a research centre or from a company will have dramatic impact on those businesses and give an unfair advantage to those countries that steal that information and pass it on to state-owned or state-influenced enterprises. And we would argue always strongly against that.
Thanks, Alastair. Here's another question. You may have heard of the new term security fatigue, with end users finding security increasingly complicated and confusing. What do you think is the best way to bridge the gap and help people get enthusiastic about its security to make training and awareness programs easier?
Yes, by 3 p.m. each day, I too have security fatigue. That's my one joke for the day. I'm hoping everyone's chuckling away online. Look, yes, Nick, I think part of the problem is we can be seen as Chicken Little sometimes. We tell people the sky's falling, the sky doesn't fall. I look outside, the beautiful blue sky here in Canberra today. World still spins, life's okay. What do you mean about this threat? What about critical infrastructure? What do you mean people are in our networks? I can't see them, I can't feel them. It's not kinetic always. It can be kinetic. Of course, we've seen that with Stuxnet, where you really get a wake-up call that these things can go into the offline world. But I think that the security fatigue thing is interesting. partly, I think the problem is not necessarily fatigue, but a learned helplessness by people outside the technology community. I think we've kept this as a technology problem for far too long, and we've allowed very well-educated, very smart people who are experts in cybersecurity to debate amongst themselves an issue that is actually a social problem. And what we then find is this linguistic and skills gap between the people that run the businesses and those who serve them in an IT security role. And so you have this disconnect. Eyes glaze over. I don't get this stuff. Surely you're just going to buy a bit more kit. That's always going to cost you more money than you said. That won't actually do everything you say it's going to do. You're not going to solve my problem, because in a couple of months' time, you're going to come back and tell me I need the next important piece of kit that's going to solve the problem, until, of course, a few months later, we come back for some more. We're probably all familiar with that. We're probably also familiar, Nick, of going to conferences saying, I've got a potential solution that will help drive down incrementally or a step change in the problem, and everyone will rip each other apart, proving that they're the smartest person in the room and why that solution won't work. And yet, the question I'm going to ask the accumulated audience is this. If we called it road fatalities, and we were talking about solutions to road fatalities, someone will say, let's enforce seatbelt laws more. We know that if people wore seatbelts, we could drive it down, and 15 of the however many deaths this year were caused by people not wearing seatbelts. People would go, good point, Nick, let's put that on the agenda. Let's enforce seatbelts more. Yes, we need better road engineering. Let's talk to local councils. I live on a country road at the moment. I've got to tell you, they could do a lot of improvement and reduce potential fatalities through good engineering. Great, good idea, Almac. Let's put that on the list. And so on it goes. Then we come to cybersecurity. And Nick says, I reckon we should patch everything or whitelist, or we should do what everyone goes, yeah, you're an idiot. It's not the most important thing that we have to do. And here's the reasons why it's not going to work. So for some reason, we expect a silver bullet, we expect nirvana, and it's a social problem that will never achieve nirvana. We can get a much better grasp on this issue. So I think the security fatigue comes with, yes, we've argued for a long time bad things are going to happen and people haven't always seen them. You don't know what you don't know, of course. So many of us would think that bad things have happened, we just don't know about them yet. I think we've spoken the wrong type of language to people. We certainly haven't given business cases. And there's been a learned helplessness on the other side, combined with a bit of hubris, and frankly, all of us trying to prove we're smarter than the other person. If we buried those things and we worked at this as a social problem, we wouldn't have security fatigue. What we would have is security successes, and we'd be dealing with this issue as humans like we do any other wicked problem that faces us.
Thanks, so now we've got about, we're just over 5 minutes left, so I'm going to pick questions. I see some questions coming in. I'm going to pick some questions from people who haven't asked any questions yet. This is the host's opportunity to select a couple, but here's one, Alastair. Should the federal government provide centralised, secure and reliable digital identification services for its citizens? For example, similar to the MyGov. The ID service would allow each to decide which verified third-party business or agency it would use with.
Certainly, for a long time, you know, you would have been involved in these discussions too, Nick, for many, many, many years about centralised, sometimes federated, and other identity platforms. We've seen them come and go. We haven't been able to get the traction on them. I think that there is a case for a Commonwealth identity for the purposes of government services. It would be great if over time those things federated and businesses chose what credentials they accepted, right? I mean, ultimately the business is the owner of their risk and has to manage that. So if a bank decides that it accepts another big bank's credentials, brilliant. I'm suspecting that the video store down the road would accept the credentials of a bank because the risk is low, but the bank may not accept the credentials of the video company down the road for their own security. So perhaps it's a federated model. Certainly there's more to be done at a Commonwealth level. It just tends to get bogged down in these intractable debates about why things aren't perfect. And again, I would just say to you, there's nothing perfect about a passport. They're pretty good. There's nothing perfect about them. People still counterfeit them. People still commit crimes using them. Driver's licenses, same. My car, good as it is, freshly serviced, still not perfect, but it's fit enough to drive. And we've got to ask ourselves the question whether or not we can get out there and be a bit smarter and faster on these things.
Thanks. As a matter of interest, I mean, there is, for example, you'll know, there is the Australian Access Federation federates about 1 million users in Australia with all the universities connected to it. The issue is, of course, the universities are prepared to trust each other to a certain level in a way that's harder often for business or government to trust at that level, I think. But
yeah, but ultimately we just have to get smart about this,
yeah.
because what it does mean is, as you know, people have too many credentials,
Yep.
which leads to the poor practices of people using the same password and easy to guess passwords that they don't change across all the systems they're using anyway. So we may as well just get a bit smarter at this.
All right, I'm afraid I'm going to have to just do one last question from here because we're going to run out of time. But for someone who hasn't asked someone, do you have a vision of what the cybersecurity version of the slip, slop, slap would contain to bring Australians understanding and knowledge of risk assessment and risk avoidance and mitigation?
Not in the 22 seconds I have left, but what I would say is that the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department, the Computer Emergency Response Team, is taking the lead on that education side. And if you have views, if your members have views, if they want to come up with creative ideas, please do. What we're going to do now is we are going to consult industry. What I've committed to doing is I'm not going to dine a ditch over this stuff, and I'm certainly going to bury brand. We just need to get smarter. So we need the banks and the telcos and other parts of industry, along with government, to say, you know what, if the four things that it is, or the three things that it is, are sitting on my list, but they're not the top three, they're numbers 2, 4, and 7, but you know what, they're on the list. Let's just start driving this down. Let's eat the elephant from one end. I'm committed to doing it. I'm committed to us funding as best we can. But I think the eyeballs and the traffic is owned by corporates and government, and we just need to be driving it consistently. People can brand it as they see fit, but we just need to agree on what those messages are. I hate to disappoint your audience to not give you my equivalent of slip, slop, slap, but you know, I bet you if we all got butcher's papered it out and we had 5 more minutes and I asked everyone to write what they came up with, you're going to have a lot of commonality. Let's just pick those. Let's not die in a ditch over it. Let's just get it done.
Thanks, Alastair. I'm going to ask you one just last question, so a leading question of sorts, but I'm sure you won't mind it. If you were able to say to us, well, how could the ACS help you in meeting what you just described as the strategy, the cybersecurity strategy?
Yeah, look, I have been having discussions with ACS. I think that's vital. I'd love the ACS to tell me what the ACS thinks are the best cybersecurity programs in universities. The ACS already has a broader role in identifying IT courses in universities, so you should be well placed to tell me what a good IT security courses are. I see the ACS having a huge role in helping to increase the professionalise the trade, right? Continuing education, getting the message out. Your members, I call it the barbecue, 1,000 points of light, are out there every weekend having barbecues with people. I'm envious because I don't get to have barbecues every weekend like your members do, but they're the ones that are asked security questions. People don't phone me up and ask. They ask you and your members. And so the more we can take the message out jointly and help, the better. I'd love to partner with the ACS. It's a really credible organisation. I'd like the ACS to hold my feet to the flame and your membership to hold my feet to the flame to ensure that I do what I said I was going to do, that we do move fast, that we are flexible, we do bury brand, and we actually act like we're here to solve a problem. Those things and then more, I'm sure we can have really active discussions, and the ACS should be really proud of how active it is and always happy to engage with.
Thank you very much, Alice. We'll look forward to engaging with you on that and trying to be part of that. And sadly, I do know that I should say to people, you're in Canberra, I think, today, and you're talking, of course, to an audience largely in Queensland, which is probably due to the weather, slightly more barbecues available to us at every week.
So that's why you have more barbecues.
That's right, yeah. So hence spreading the message. So I'm sorry to everyone that I wasn't able to get absolutely all of the questions. We got virtually all of them. It's just there are lots coming through, and it's fantastic that we're getting so many questions. Alastair, can I thank you particularly for sparing the time in what is on a very, very busy schedule to do this webinar. I hope it was effective from your point of view. We think this is quite a good way to an effective use of time and to reach people, because there's people all over Queensland, just as far from Brisbane as Canberra is probably sitting on this webinar. So it's fantastic for you to do, and thank you very much for being so candid with us.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Real pleasure as always.
So thank you, and to thank everyone who's on there. As you probably gathered, and I should have said at the front, so particularly particularly useless of me in introducing myself. I'm Nick Tate, the chair of the Queensland branch. I'll do that now at the end, just in case we need to on the recording. But this is the first of a series of webinars, but frankly, it's going to be very hard to meet the standard you've set, Alastair. Thank you very much indeed for joining.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll sign off now. This was recorded and will be available as a recording later. Okay, thank you.